it was built in 1941. It was built on a strip of land called Black Moor, which was basically sort of arable land. And as usual, the ministry used to go around looking for areas of flat land that they could use for airfields, and that was one of them they picked out. So, like I say, it was built in 1941, and they had initially, when it was finished, they built Hamptons, Hanley Page Hamptons, and Manchester's. Avro Manchester's on the field, but they were quickly dropped. I believe it was 42 or 43. They changed them for Lancasters. So the squadrons that were there, which was 61 Squadron and 50 Squadron, they moved to RAF Swinderby whilst they extended the runway, because the runway wasn't long enough for the Lancasters. So they moved the over there and then extended the runway. So they added a strip of runway on, you know what they call the RAF estate, sort of on Fulmer Road.
Yep.
They extended it through there, so that there was one runway big enough for these Lancasters. And then they all came back, and it was an active squadron until the end of the war. And I believe after the war, it was like a dumping ground, basically. That it was given a better name, but it was basically a dumping ground for army vehicles and things, and they were just sort of ripped to bits. And it was called an active airfield, but it wasn't really. It was just a place to disband everything that was used in the war. So
there's some like mounds on site, because we've looked at some soil, collected soil, and looked at the data for that. And there's places where there's like mounds of soil. Would that be waste that was left behind, or?
Some of them are square. If you notice, some of them are actually a form of square, and they used those for storing bombs in. But all of those earthworks are used for deflecting any blasts sort of upwards, so that the bombs, if the bombs went off accidentally, then it deflected the blast upwards, so it didn't. Because obviously it was wide open then, so the blast could attack, hit the aircraft. Yeah, that's why they were only there. There were probably a storage of bombs nearby there, and they were stored behind them, so it would deflect any blast that went off. That's the main reason for them, because that whole area would be swamped out with munitions of various different kinds, and they'd be stored in stacks. And then when they were due to be used, they'd take them away and have fuses fitted. And then once they'd arrived at the aircraft, then the fuses will be activated.
And I suppose the other thing that we noticed, obviously, were the bunkers. Is this where the bombs were stored, or what were these used
for? No, they're literally air raid shelters. So the idea behind those was that if there was an attack on the airfield, because that part of the airfield was quite remote, but these structures were dotted all around the airfield, and it was just somewhere to dash if there was an air raid on. And the shape of the roof is supposedly to deflect the bombs away from hitting, sort of like a flat surface, if you like. So, but how effective they'd have been if they were actually, I don't know. Probably not. But they were. I mean, there was a lot of bombing of the airfields during the war, so try and stop us from going over and attacking Germany. So they were a prime target at one time. So yeah, so that's why they were there. It's just to help personnel hide in sort of relative safety.
Were there any buildings on site?
Oh yeah, loads of them. I've got some maps that I can probably let you have a copy of, and it lists every single building that was on the site. So they're all numbered and given an allocation of what they were for. So towards the far end area, there was quite a few huts in that area where those shelters were, that were just for general use. So if it was raining, you were quite a way away from sort of any kind of place to shelter, so they put buildings up to literally just sit in if it got bad weather. We found areas for that we weren't known about, so we've sort of started digging areas on the playing field near the sports centre, and
Okay.
we came across the base for the flight officers' office. So that was obviously a very strategic point because the flight office was the boss. He was the man in charge. So, but that was sort of central to the middle of the airfield. So, along with the control towers and the fuel dumps and things.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing. I mean, do you know why? I mean, so it became disused because on the map I've got it's from 1970. Do you know when they stopped?
I think it was around 1955 that they finished using the airfield for MOD purposes.
And then did they just dismantle everything and just let it just?
Yeah, they just basically push a bulldozer through everything and flatten it and take it away. Which is why you tend to get a lot of the bases still standing, still in situ, but the top of them gone. You see, so
Yeah.
we don't know of any that have survived in the area. The only building I can say that's semi-standing is if you come to the end of Birchwood Avenue where the garage is, opposite there's a field with horses on. There's traditionally always some horses there. Well, in there's like a structure that looks like a fairly modern build. But if you look at it, part of that is old brick, and that's one of the Women's Royal Air Force huts. So that's about the only structure we know of that's left that's above ground level. So everything else has been sort of um, decked to the floor. So they're the old blueprints they used to make the. So each building had a style that it was made under. So there was like a predefined set of buildings that they would use, so hangars, officers' quarters, canteens, toilets, and they were all built to a set standard so that when they built these airfields, they would, instead of sort of designing each individual airfield, it was literally you just say, right, I want one of those, one of those, one of those here. And the airfield was built in little blocks. So you get a block of airmen and staff living on one site, and then a bit further round there'd be another block of same, very similar. So there'd be a guard's hut, and then there'd be latrines and somewhere to wash up and dry your clothes, and huts for sleeping in, and somewhere to eat. And this would be repeated all the way around the airfield. So if there was a bombing attack, it didn't hit everything at once. So sort of minimise loss, if you know what I mean. It's they were very spread out affairs, and some of these huts are right down the other side of Doddington Road, so the other side of the estate. Some of these huts, so it was quite a big affair.